Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Solar Opposite. Okay, so this episode, the Earth Rank Beta, is essentially, in the previous episode, it was established that Terry is now the boss of Davenport Rakes. He took over after their last boss had an episode from, being resurrected, and then he killed himself two separate times. Not great, but, yeah, this episode obviously continues the plot lines from both of those. About how, obviously, Korvo is resentful of Terry because Terry took the position as a leader, which the Korvo in this episode is established doesn't think Terry really deserves, because he doesn't think Terry would be a good leader. He establishes that, but also this episode continues the plot line from last episode, where obviously, because of what happens, Jesse and Yumilak are grounded and they want to sneak out to see a concert of a band. So that winds up being a thing. But in case the episode does open up with that, with everybody sitting in a board meeting, and they are currently, sitting down, and they're currently playing, and Korvo is obviously annoyed, because here's the setup. Terry is sitting in a box, waiting to just pop out and reveal that he was there the whole time. And Korvo immediately knows that that's exactly what Terry's going to do, because, Terry's a bit of a dumbass. He understands how Terry's mind works. Everybody else is just questioning whether or not Terry would be able to where Terry is, and what Terry's gonna do to open the presentation, and what sick new presentation he's planning to have. But and of course, there's also another thing with the whole Pam and Jim stand-ins from the previous episode, but where they do a joke. But of course, Korvo is just annoyed with all of them, pointing out that obviously the whole thing is that he's understanding exactly what Terry's going to do, and he points out that this whole presentation is kind of stupid. But in any case, it is at this point where Terry proceeds to pop out of the box, revealing that he did exactly what Korvo was predicting he'd do. At which point he proceeds to get the presentation underway and explain his new idea for the company about what he's going to do now that Mr. Sturgeon is no longer around. But of course, he goes on to explain how obviously they don't have a very good demographic in the of Rakes, because obviously they're just hoarding them in the warehouse. They're not selling enough of them. So of course, Terry, realizing he has some information that Mr. Sturgeon did not have, then proceeds to reveal what his big plan for the company is going forward. If you remember the wooded city that the Solar Opposites accidentally created, essentially Terry's entire plan for that is planning to go to the leader of the city. I believe he's called the I forget exactly what his name is. I think his name is the commissioner, because compost joke. It's a woods joke. But he explains how he's going to meet with the commissioner, and he is going to enter an exclusive deal with him to make Davenport Rakes the sole provider of rakes for the entire city, which is essentially going to give them a monopoly over the city and enable them to make a lot of money really quickly. And it is a really good idea, admittedly, for Terry. Terry's not exactly the more he's more the more socially outgoing of the two. So he's not as smart, especially since it's been established in previous seasons that Terry isn't exactly good at his job as the pupa specialist in the core team. So obviously that's part of the reason why Korvo doesn't think he'd be a good leader. Obviously, he knows that Terry is not very good at his job in their unit, so he's a little concerned about how Terry would be a good president here. But it is admittedly a pretty surprisingly good idea from Terry. He gives them he has a pretty solid idea to just go in and monopolize the entirety of the wooded area. And Of course, he then proceeds to declare that it's going to be a very important mission and that they're going to need to bring their best personnel. So he then proceeds to pick everybody in the room except Korvo, who he asks to go get lunch, which of course annoys Korvo very, very much because he points out that he's not getting lunch. But of course he then proceeds to Terry proceeds to misses the point of why Korvo's mad at him and proceeds to instruct one of the other employees to go get lunch. And tells some guy named Glenn to go get lunch, which of course annoys Korvo as well. And he tries to have him voted off the team to make him so that he can go on the trip. But of course, Terry is revealed that he will not that he can't vote Glenn off because Glenn is going to get them lunch, so he can't do that, which of course annoys Korvo to no end. And meanwhile, at the house. We then see Jesse and Yamilek, who are currently, well, we've established, grounded from the previous events of the episode. Obviously, they tried to prank each other, which resulted in a girl at their school getting covered in dicks, and another getting his head crushed by a log smashing trap. So for that, both of them are grounded for that, and of course they're obviously very annoyed with that, but. Of course, it's then revealed that Jesse is actually a very big fan of a band called Daft Trunk, which is obviously a parody of Daft Punk. And also, at the end of the episode is interestingly a commentary on Daft Punk itself. We'll get to that, but we'll get to that as a band. Daft Punk themselves. There's an interesting commentary there. I was not expecting that from this episode, but we'll get to that. But in case Jesse points out that she loves Daft Trunk and loves all their music, while Yamilek plays it cool and admits that he doesn't really care for their music. We'll find out in a minute that he's lying, but that's an important part of the arc. But of course she's annoyed, and it's at this point where Terry and Korvo then proceed to come downstairs and are obviously still arguing with each other, with Korvo insisting that Terry let him come to the meeting with the commissioner so that they can actually get all of the soil so that they can actually close the deal properly. But Terry points out that he can't really let Korvo do that, pointing out that he's already committed to their main team and that he can only allow, as he puts it, essential personnel come with, which of course very much annoys him. But and of course Korvo is still annoyed. But it's at this point where they bring up that they're going to the Wooded City. And it's at this point where Jesse immediately perks up and immediately goes to Terry and Korvo and asks for special permission to come with. As we find out, so the Daft Trunk is putting on a concert at the Wooded City and admits that it has been her dream to go and see them. So she begs Korvo and Terry to come with. Korvo is obviously a lot more strict of the two. So he's very much points out that they obviously need structure in their familial unit, which means she's grounded and she's not allowed to come with. And of course points out that obviously that would cause the people to turn into a giant mist monster thing again. But while Terry is a lot more sympathetic and lenient, pointing out that he would love to have her come with, but also points out that as an adult he has to make adult decisions and has adult responsibilities, and points out that he can't just go a full 180 on her grounding for that reason, which of course annoys her, and she proceeds to stomp off. Which of course is at this point where Terry once again tells Korvo that he can't come with, even though Korvo is very insistent that he do. And Terry then proceeds to leave and gets on the bus shuttle to go to the Wooded City. Meanwhile, and this is at this point where the story does kind of break up into an A plot and B plot. Not really. It happens more halfway through the episode. But meanwhile, Korvo just kind of goes to sit at his desk. And Glenn proceeds to come up to Korvo because their cubicles are right next to each other in the office setting that they work in. But their cubicles are right next to each other, which means Glenn comes right up to Korvo, and Korvo is obviously annoyed by Glenn. First and foremost, because Glenn essentially stole his position on the board of things. and on the essential personnel trip. But also he points out that Glenn being in close proximity doesn't exactly make them friends, and that is a very good point to have. But and of course, also what we find out is that Glenn has an annoying habit of just telling everybody candy trivia, and he tells Korvo a very annoying trivia piece about the Milky Way bar, which is secretly a Mars bar, because of how the recipe is made, and this causes Korvo to become upset. And he tells him that if he tells him one more little fact about candy, he will hurt him. And sure enough, Glenn proceeds to not shut up about candy trivia. So Korvo uses a ray to turn him into a stapler, and it's at this point where as we find out, Terry then at this point then proceeds to call Korvo and tells him that he needs Glenn, and if he can put him on the phone. But Korvo points out that the person named Glenn is now a stapler, which of course causes Terry to become mad at him, pointing out that he can't keep turning his fellow co-workers into office supplies. And Korvo then makes a big point about how he had no idea he wasn't allowed to do that, and that it was the first time and he had no idea. But then he opens his desk drawer and we find out that actually he has turned several other people into office supplies, and they're just in his drawer now. So of course he proceeds to close the drawer, not telling Terry any of this, because Terry is currently on the phone. He can't see any of this. Because he's not currently in the room with Korvo. But it's at this point where Terry reveals that he had a very big, important mission for Glenn. And if he's not there, then he might as well hang up. But Korvo points out that he's here and he can take the mission. Although Terry admits that he was really pointing out that Glenn felt like more of the person that he can do. But of course he tells Korvo anyway that he can do the mission. Then proceeds to reveal that he needs Korvo to go to the house and pick up the pupa, which causes Korvo to become mad because obviously it's his house and his pupa, and Glenn has no real business being in their house for any particular reason. And of course, Terry points out that obviously he feels like Glenn would have be a bit more mature in terms of that, and that he would be able to handle it a little bit better. But of course, this causes Korvo to just hang up and after telling Terry that he'll go get the pupa, and then leaves the office to go get him. And it's at this point where he walks in on the replicants playing hoops with the pupa, having been strung up on the wall and keeping score with his eyes, which is a fun little visual. But he then insists that they stop doing. Korvo then at that point comes home, tells them to stop doing that, and they're confused because they point out that he really should be home, that he really should be at work. But of course, Korvo points out that he's not at work because Terry asked him very specifically to bring him the pupa, and also tells him that they should take him off the wall because he's obviously not a scoreboard or a score hoop or a what is a basketball hoop. They tell him not to use the pupa as a basketball hoops, and then tells him that he's going upstairs to get changed, and that's when he comes back he's taking the pupa with. And meanwhile, Jesse and Yumilak point out that this is probably the best opportunity for them to sneak out of the house and go to the Daft Trunk concert. And Yumilak points out that it may be a good idea, but also points out that the pupa needs more structure and that sneaking in the house is probably a bad idea. But Jesse then proceeds to point out that that's the most normal thing ever for teenagers who are grounded to sneak out of the house. And I mean, I've never done it, but I've heard people have done it when they don't agree with being grounded. So I don't know. That's something I've heard from TV and stuff. I'm not entirely sure if that's real, but and you see they point out that that's exactly the reason why. But then proceeds to wonder how they're going to actually sneak out. And then they remember that they strung up the pupa on the wall as a basketball hoop, and realize that the best way to sneak out of the house is to hide inside of him. And sure enough, they then proceed to come with Korvo inside the pupa and to the wooded city, which is at this point where it breaks into an A plot and B plot. As Korvo almost proceeds to run a guy over who was on his bike because he was only half paying attention to the road, which of course causes them to start screaming at each other. And while they're shouting at each other, and the pupa proceeds to spit up Jesse and Yumilak, and they proceed to go on their merry way and go to find some food vendors because Jesse promised there'd be food vendors. And And meanwhile, Korvo, there's a really funny gag where Korvo says that he wants to switch his Hulu insurance to Disney Plus insurance because after calling and figuring out that the Hulu insurance is useless and does not actually cover accidents, he decides to switch to his Disney Plus insurance, but then finds out that it's the same company. Which is an in-universe thing where Disney, Hulu isn't fully owned by Disney. I mean, it is partly owned by Fox. I'm pretty sure owned by Fox, but I also know that a lot of Fox's networking and stuff like that is owned by Disney, so they do own a majority share on Hulu, which I do find hilarious. I mean, I don't think it's a fully 100% because I still also think it's 100% because I know Warner Brothers owns a stock in it. I know a couple of other companies own stock in it. You know, not necessarily things that are owned by Fox, and Disney. I think they own like half of it, and then Warner Brothers owns the other half. I think it's a joint partnership or something like that because of stocks and stuff, which is interesting. But in any cases, at this point, we split into an A plot and B plot, so I'm going to get into the A plot. First and foremost, Korvo proceeds to bring the pupa to the hotel room, which of course causes him to become, he's visibly annoyed by this point, because obviously Terry has not only forbid him from coming on the trip, but has also dragged him all the way. But also, we'll find out in a minute. But he then proceeds to bring the pupa upstairs to Terry's room, and of course Terry just kind of doesn't even acknowledge that Korvo's there. He just tells him that he thinks it's still Glenn, and then proceeds to take the pupa from Korvo and then close the door. And Korvo, of course, becomes annoyed that Terry won't even talk to him. So he proceeds to pull out his keychain and pulls out a little pocket laser that's on it that he then uses to melt the door and get it open. And of course he proceeds to barge in, and what he finds out is that they're essentially Terry and the rest of his team are just partying like wild animals. Essentially, they have ordered a bunch of food and cocktail mixers. There's a giant sculpture of Terry, which is not accurate because it's jacked, while Terry is not. And of course, what we find out is Terry is that he's really annoyed that this is in fact Terry's entire plan to just kind of party it up before they go to what is essentially the biggest meeting of the entire company so far, and Terry's first big meeting at that. And of course, he's also annoyed. He also points out that this isn't how responsible leadership acts. But and then also wonders why exactly it is that Korvo brought him the pupa in the first place. And it's revealed that Terry needed the pupa to open his briefcase. And it's of course at this point where the briefcase is revealed to have retinal scans, by the way. But at this point where the briefcase opens to reveal a knockoff Chuck E. Cheese that exists in the Wooded Kingdom called Woodchucky. I don't know the exact words, but it's a parody of Chuck E. Cheese. That's the point. But in any case, it's full with knockoff Chuck E. Cheese tokens for the knockoff Chuck E. Cheese restaurants. And of course, Korvo is obviously visibly concerned, because obviously he points out that so what we know is the restaurant is established to be a restaurant for kids, like the real Chuck E. Cheese. So obviously Korvo's concerned that Terry shouldn't be bringing someone as important as the commissioner to come to go to Chuck E. Cheese. But Terry points out that that's obviously a great place where he's going to bring him there, and then he'll woo him over with the Earth Rake, which is going to rake which he designs as a kind of a beta thing, and obviously that's the thing that the episode's named after. But of course, Korvo points out that this is obviously every rake rakes the Earth, and points out that there's a very good chance that Terry's going to tank the company if he continues like this. And but Terry then proceeds to dismiss him and tells him that it's not really his concern, and tells him that he can go, that he's more than welcome to go home. But Korvo points out that he's not going to go home, and that he really should be part of the meeting, especially since he drove 3 hours from their hometown to the wooded city. And just for Terry to open his briefcase, and now Terry's essentially telling him that he has to drive 3 hours back, and Korvo is pissed at that. He is not going to commute another 3 hours. He doesn't want to because that was kind of a pointless trip. But, of course, Terry tells him that he needs to go back to work, and, of course, this causes Korvo to become annoyed. So he then proceeds to put the pupa in the car with a little fidget thing, telling it that he can play with it while he waits in the car. At which point, he then proceeds to go up, and that winds up becoming important. We'll get into that later. But he winds up going back up to the office, back up to the hotel room, and tells everybody to vamoose, which of course Terry isn't really wants to do, but it's this point where Korvo then proceeds to quote unquote reveal. We'll get to that. But quote unquote reveals that that Terry have been ordering Korvo around and giving him all these bossy things to do is turning him on. So Terry does dismiss everybody, and everybody leaves the hotel room, at which point they proceed to seemingly start having sex in the bed. But then it's revealed that Korvo actually did that as a ruse. As it turns out, Korvo did that so he could Gerald's game. Essentially, as Terry puts it, Gerald's game Terry. Which is a very famous Stephen King. Actually, I don't think it's one of the more famous. I don't know, but it is a reference to one of Stephen King's novels, Gerald's Game. And of course, Korvo reveals that the reason he did this is because he's obviously very concerned that Terry is going to tank the company and that he needs to do this for the good of Davenport Rakes. And with that, he then proceeds to leave. Terry bemoans the fact that he is now tied to the bed and cannot leave. And is very angry that Korvo has essentially left him. But of course, at this point where they then proceed to reveal, so this point where Korvo then proceeds to go meet with the commissioner, and he's a bit of a portlier business type man, like you would expect to suspect. But he then proceeds to bring Korvo into a game of golf, and they do decide to start playing a game of golf, and of course, the commissioner is a little confused because he was expecting Terry, but he admits that Terry isn't currently available, but that he's more than happy to spend as much time as the commissioner needs him to close the deal. And of course, the commissioner then proceeds to tell Korvo that he really wants his business, that he will have to shoot around a guy standing in the middle of the green. But he tells him to shoot around him and get it and can't sink his hole from where it is. And what we find out is that Korvo can do that very handily, because we find out golf apparently was also a sport on Schlorp before it blew up. So Korvo proceeds to explain that he's a bit of a crack shot at it because they practiced it a lot on Schlorp in between, all the sci-fi stuff that they normally do on that planet. They normally used to do on that planet. And of course, the commissioner is annoyed that Korvo managed to sink his shot, so he then insists multiple times that he'll up the ante multiple times, and of course Korvo proceeds to sink every single shot, which of course causes the commissioner to become increasingly, well, not necessarily annoyed, but increasingly anxious as Korvo continues to sink his shots. And of course, at this point where Terry then proceeds to successfully get the hotel phone off of its hook, and then proceeds to call the front desk, and tells the front desk that there's somebody that he's been tied to, that he's been Gerald's games, and that he's an important CEO in a Rake company. When that initially doesn't work, because they point out that they can't just let go everybody who's been Gerald's games. And it's at this point where the bellhop finally comes up, and it's reveal that there's just a myriad of things that are just going to go wrong and all at once. Reveal that, and of course, what we find out is that the guy has a heart condition, he ran up a flight of stairs, didn't take his heart medication, and just ate a Philly's cheesesteak. And then he proceeds to die and land on top of Terry, which is a problem. But of course, it's at this point where they then proceed to call. This time proceeds to happen several times, I should mention, and eventually that does wind up freeing Terry because it's weighed down by all the dead bellhops that keep coming up and immediately dying horribly, which of course saves Terry, and he's able to get out and go find Korvo. Meanwhile, Korvo has sat down with the commissioner, who is looking a little bit squirrely at this point. And Korvo then proceeds to tell the commissioner that he's more than willing to listen to his business now, since now, obviously, the commissioner has taken several bets at this point, and now owes Korvo a kind of a story about how they're actually supposed to, learn about how he's actually supposed to take his business. But the commissioner's honestly not really paying attention to that, pointing out that he's trying to figure out a way to get his money back. And it's at this point where he then proceeds to see an advertisement for wings, where if he can eat it, where revealing that if he can eat them fast enough, eat the entire plate of wings in an hour, that Korvo owes him his money back. But if not, he'll listen to Korvo's presentation. And Korvo points out that that's a very stupid and dangerous idea, and that there's a very good chance the commissioner could die from that. But also points out that he'd be stupid for not taking the bet, since that's just free business. So he does bet the commissioner. At which point, Terry has since found Korvo, still tied to the bed, might I add. He eventually does break out of it, but he's still tied to the bed. He apparently just came there with the back bed frame just attached to him, which is funny. But and of course, at this point, where Korvo then proceeds to go outside and deal with Terry, and of course, Terry is obviously visibly annoyed about the whole situation that just occurred, and then tells Korvo that he needs to really learn, that he really is annoyed at Korvo for not trusting him to be a good leader, but. Of course, Korvo points out that he's closing the deal, something that he doesn't think Terry is fully capable of. At which point, the two then proceed to get into a fight with Rakes, which is on brand for where they work and what the episode is. But then they proceed to start fighting with Rakes, and they're pretty evenly matched, obviously. But this is this point where Terry realizes that Korvo proceeds to pin Terry down and tells Terry that he's won, and points out that he needs to learn that he's not a good leader, and then proceeds to tell him that if he had his way, he would just sold him his weird Earth Rake thing. But it's this point where Terry remembers what the Earth Rake is and remembers that he has it, and then proceeds to pull out a remote. And it's revealed that the Earth Rake is actually this giant satellite thing that launches a rake and literally rakes the Earth. It's a giant rake in the space. And of course, this causes Korvo to run from it, and everybody's visibly impressed by the Earth Rake, I should mention. It's a cool idea. They think it's a cool idea. But it's at this point where it hits what we find out is not really a water tower, but a honey tower, and it causes honey to spill everywhere, and they then proceed to wonder why the city would have so much honey. But of course, at this point where Terry proceeds to apologize to Korvo, pointing out that they really should not have gotten each other, that they went too far. But also is insistent that it's all Terry's fault for trying to bring the commissioner to essentially a discount Chuck E. Cheese. But of course, what we find out is that Terry points out that it wasn't really as trivial as Korvo makes it seem to be, because as he proceeds to point out, the commissioner is, it's established that the commissioner is, it was heavily implied in the episode, but the commissioner is a bit of a gambler. He has a habit of gambling his money and likes taking big bets and big risks, and points out that the reason he brought him to the discount Chuck E. Cheese is because he realizes that is essentially a casino, but for kids. And this, of course, causes Korvo to realize that what Terry says is true, because he realizes that the commissioner has been trying to make a bunch of deals all day and trying to make a bunch of bets, and realizes Terry was right, and then proceeds to apologize to Terry and points out that he is a lot better leader than Korvo gives him credit for. And but then realizes they're about to die in honey and they need to figure out how to get out of it. So of course, Terry then proceeds to ask Korvo to give him his phone, which Korvo then reluctantly agrees to, until Terry reminds him that he needs to trust Terry as more of a leader. And of course, Terry then proceeds to order a pizza, which Korvo is initially annoyed at as he goes under the honey. But in case Terry orders an artichoke pizza with other toppings on it, and of course they then proceed to drown. Both proceed to drown as Terry is finishing the order. But it's at this point when Pizza Guy comes and rescues them and asks for his money and tip, and points out that he couldn't find them initially, but then realized that they were drowning in all the honey. And of course, Korvo, although annoyed that he has to now pay the guy and give him his tip, does wonder how Terry knew that would work. And of course, what we find out is that, well, this is how delivery drivers get paid in real life, but he does point out that if they don't make a delivery, it has to come out, the money has to come out of their pocket. And he tells Terry and he tells Korvo that they're essentially more reliable than any sort of emergency vehicle thing. And of course, Korvo is happy about the fact that he's very happy about the fact that they went on this big that Korvo Terry is obviously very much matured. And of course, after the honey winds up getting drained, they wind up proceeding to go and meet with the commissioner, who has finished his plate of wings, and obviously is in a bit of a rough shape because, as Korvo mentioned, the plate of wings would probably kill him because they're very spicy. But of course, Korvo then proceeds to. Of course, he also responds that he's in such a good mood that he's really willing to listen to Korvo's pitch, regardless of whether or not he won or not. So Korvo then proceeds to get ready to deliver his pitch, but then points out that Terry's actually the guy he needs to talk to. And it's at this point where Terry reveals that he's stepping down as the president of Davenport Rake, effective immediately. And of course when Korvo wonders why he would do something like that, for obviously throwing away what could be a very lucrative career and business decision for them, he points out that he could be more of a responsible leader at home. He doesn't necessarily need to be the head of Davenport Rakes. But also points out that it will save them a lot of time and commute time, so he points out that that's also another big reason why. But, and of course, Korvo then proceeds to respect his decision and also decides to quit too. And also the commissioner just kind of dies in the background of this scene, which is funny. But in any case, yeah, the A plot ends with them both quitting their jobs and no longer working at Davenport Rakes. Even though Korvo admits that there was giving the pupa structure, but they also point out that they had a huge sci-fi battle with Rakes and admit that the pupa was fine. So they point out that the pupa that they don't really need to worry about maintaining structure. Some structure, of course, because obviously maintaining structure in a familiar unit is important, and that's kind of what the point of the past couple of episodes have been. But of course, they then proceed to remember that they left the pupa in the car, and initially think he's dead because they left him in the car with the windows up, and then it's revealed that that's just how the pupa sleeps, and they realize that that's a wake-up call and that they need to not leave the pupa alone for extended periods of time, which but then as they proceed to kind of learn their lesson from that, they then proceed to get distracted by, I forget what, but they get distracted and leave the pupa on his own, still locked in the car with the windows up, which isn't great. But I guess that's the A plot. So getting into the B plot, shortly after leaving the pupa, Jesse and Yamilak proceed to try and figure out how they're supposed to find the invites to the concert, and admits that they need to find one of the golden turnips that are scattered throughout the city after, of course, they stop at a vending truck, but and they proceed to point out that the way to find them is actually hidden in the music. They proceed to point out that the way that they, in order to do that, they need to listen to Daft Punk's music and listen to the lyrics that are within it, so that they can find one of the golden turnips. And of course they do successfully do that the first time. Although, and of course Jesse insists that Yamilak listen to it so they can actually listen to the lyrics. And of course, Yamilak is reluctant, pointing out that their music, he doesn't even think their music is that good, but his face tells a different story. I will admit that. His face tells a different story, and the way his body language is, it very much tells a different story, that he's obviously lying about not liking their music. So, of course, Jesse then proceeds to lead them to a statue that's in the town square, because that's where the lyrics are pointing to. And of course they then proceed to go to that statue, but it's at this point where they're stopped by two bullies who proceed to essentially mock them because they're Schlorpians. They then proceed to tell them that they're not allowed to come anywhere near the statue, and look, and sure enough, it's revealed that they're just stalling for time until somebody can steal the golden turnip before they can, which of course causes Jesse and Yamilak to become very mad at the bullies for it. But as they're being picked on, they're suddenly rescued by a pine cone. who proceeds to tell them that they should really get out of there and leave, because all they're doing is causing trouble. And of course, the two bullies reluctantly leave and go off on their merry way. Meanwhile, the Pinecone then proceeds to tell them that ask them if they're okay, and he admits that they're fine, and that they do thank him for helping them out, but admits that now they're going to have to find another golden turnip so that they can get into the Daft Trunk concert. And of course, it's revealed that the Pinecone is actually a big fan of Daft Trunk himself, so he decides to help them out. And then reveals that he also has a motorcycle with a sidecar that they can take. So he proceeds to lead them onto the next search where they can find out where the concert is. And they then proceed to listen to another lyrics, which points them to a literal apple store full of literal apples, which is funny. But of course, Jesse then proceeds to lead them inside, and they start to think through the lyrics again because they're not entirely sure where they are. And of course, they start throwing the apples, which the lady at behind the counter isn't particularly happy about. But they then realize after Jesse thinks through the lyrics again that they need to bite into something to find the golden turnip. And of course, they start biting into the venue, which of course causes the lady to become annoyed again and insisting that they'll have to pay for all of it, and essentially pay for all the damages they're causing, which of course they don't do. I'll get to that. They don't do any of that, but eventually, they do find the golden turnip, which is revealed to lead to where the location of the concert is. And of course, they then proceed to head back to the Pinecone's motorcycle. But it's at this point where it's revealed that he's actually not a Pinecone at all. And he then proceeds to reveal that he's actually not a Pinecone, but actually a old rancid peach. Which, of course, it's not. Which, of course, they realize that he lied to them. But also, he pulls out a gun and demands that they give him the golden turnip, which does have instructions on how to find the venue, by the way. But he insists that they give him their stuff and the acorn and the turnip, revealing that he actually plans to sell it, and that he plans so that he can be his girlfriend again in Atlanta. Which, but as we find out, first and foremost, we find out this guy's origin story, which is that he was actually part of the peach appletini that Terry brought with him when they first created the Wooded City, and since he's obviously not not a tree or anything else, he's doesn't belong. So he's always been a bit of an outsider, and eventually disguised himself as an acorn. As a Pinecone, so that he can just live amongst the people in the city without them persecuting him or anything like that. But now insists that he's going to go find his girlfriend now that he has all the things. But what we find out is that that's heavily implied that his girlfriend isn't his girlfriend anymore, because her roommate constantly gives, as he describes it, her roommate constantly gives her back rubs and a whole bunch of other things, and points out that he must be horrible and he needs to rescue her from that. But of course, Jesse and Yummy do point out that they obviously know that they're able to read between the lines and figure out that his girlfriend isn't really his girlfriend anymore. But he insists that she still loves him, and insists that they give him all of their stuff. And then proceeds to drive off on his motorcycle while leaving. And this, of course, makes them realize that now they have no way of actually finding the Daft Trunk concert, which of course annoys them. Which of course winds up annoying Jesse, because they work so hard to find that turnip. But to this point where and of course without their stuff, they're not going to be able to listen to all the songs and figure out where the next one is. But to this point Yummy proceeds to explain that in order to do that, they would need to know somebody who has all the songs memorized. And I think you can see where we're going with this. Yeah, as it turns out, Yummy is actually, it was heavily implied, but Yummy is revealed to actually be a big Daft Trunk fan. And that's he has all their songs memorized, which means he can finds pretty much including a couple of songs that Jesse has never actually heard. So he proceeds to explain that to that he knows exactly where to find all the to find all of the all of the turnips, as well as where to possibly find the venue, because he reveals that there's actually a song that tells them to specifically look up, and they then proceed to look up and see a giant floating hologram thing that points them to where the venue is. And of course, they then proceed to follow it to the venue, sneaking into the back entrance, because they realize that since they don't have a turnip, they can't really get in the front way. So of course, Yummy asks Jesse to give him a boost, and when Jesse asks why she has to give him a boost, he then proceeds to explain the obvious thing about how, obviously, Jesse has been doing, and this is kind of a bit of a fourth wall joke, but Jesse has had a lot more character development than Yumulak, and he explains that her shoulders are stronger because of it. And yeah, that's something I didn't really notice until they said it. Yumulak hasn't really had many character development episodes. He's mostly just been, a lot of his episodes are really one note, so he hasn't really done much of anything with those. But of course, he then proceeds to scoop them up, and she then proceeds to realize that he's right, and then proceeds to lift him up on her shoulders, and he climbs in through a window. At which point, he gets to meet Daft Trunk and is very excited to meet them and asks them if they can sign his forehead. But of course, at this point, which revealed that Daft Trunk are actually the two bullies that picked on them at the start of their plot, which. Of course, Yummy quickly realizes that what they said about not meeting your heroes was true, and of course they then proceed to beat the shit out of him with their helmets, and then proceed to just kind of kick his ass. And of course, at this point where Yumulak eventually emerges from the backstage area, and of course, Jesse is happy to have met them, pointing out that Yumulak tells them that he met Daft Trunk, and she's very excited and wonders what they're like. And Yumulak, realizing how much Daft Trunk meant to Jesse, decides not to tell her what kind of people they actually are, about how they're the bullies that picked on them at the start of the episode. And of course, at this point where he proceeds to tell them that they were amazing, but also that she just missed them, and that they obviously went off to go do other celebrity things. So she obviously just missed them, and she's upset that she didn't get to meet them, but also points out that's probably for the best if they're busy. And then they proceed to sneak back into the house, but Yumulak as kind of a memento reveals that he got one of their helmets. And then proceeds to hand it to her, and she starts wearing it around the house, which of course winds up being a bit of a subversion of the Pupa getting something that he's not supposed to have, because now Jessie has something that she's not supposed to have. And meanwhile, Korvo and Terry are obviously gone back to fixing the ship and doing sci-fi things. So yeah, the whole subplot about them working at Davenport Rakes didn't really last all that long, but it did wind up returning to the status quo. Eventually, it just took a little bit longer than it should have. But in case at this point where the episode ends with Yumulak revealing that actually he had shrunk down the members of Daft Trunk and is now going to put them in the wall for being rude to him and his sister and beating him up. And of course, Daft Trunk insists that they'll get out and that they're good. He's not going to get away with this, but he just mocks them by calling them Daft Shrunk, and that proceeds to put them inside the wall. And it's at this point where we finally get to reconnect with the wall and figure out what's going on in there. And what we find out is that ever since Sister Sisto has taken over the wall and turned it into a kind of a religious thing, where they now believe that Pesley is the Messiah delivered to them by Jesse. Obviously, everybody has now become devout followers of the Bowenian Church, and they find that out all too late, as two Bowenian, paladins, I guess we would call them, since, they're from the church, but two paladins walk up in full armor made out of trash and stuff, but they walk up in full armor, and asks Daft Trunk if they're there to receive the word of Jesse, and of course they then Daft Trunk of course proceed to point out that they hate Jesse with every fiber of their being, literally, because they're trees. But they then proceed to tell them that they hate Daft Trunk hate them with every fiber of their being, and then proceed to point out that obviously they're not going to spread the word of gospel of Jesse. And of course they proceed to point out that anyone who doesn't spread the gospel of Jesse must die, and then proceeds to grab and execute both of them on the spot, which of course is dark, but also makes sense considering the wall has some dark stuff that's going on in it. So and we're gonna get to this, but since obviously this episode kind of status quos Terry and Korvo back to normal. But also, the B-plot has a commentary on Daft Punk, a real-world band that the episode obviously is kind of alluding to and kind of bases its fictional versions on. But, yeah, this episode kind of does a commentary on why Daft Punk suddenly broke up and stopped making music. Because, obviously, in the real world, and obviously Daft Punk, the reason they stopped making music is they get kidnapped, shrunken down, put in a wall, and are murdered. Obviously, that's what happens in this episode. But, in real life, that's not exactly what happens, as we find out. And so, essentially what happened is, Daft Punk, they were a real band up until 2-3 years ago, and recently they came out explaining why. Turns out, the increase of use of artificial intelligence and AI in all sorts of fields has kind of caused them to rethink their branding. And they decided to just step away from Daft Punk. The two members of it have decided to step away from Daft Punk for a while. And, pointing out that they don't really want to be associated with robots in a world where AI is now a lot bigger a thing, a lot more of a thing. So, yeah. Wound up being a commentary on Daft Punk, which I found interesting. Well, that's weird. But in any case, yeah, that's just a commentary on Daft. I figured I would just put that in, because I was not expecting that from this episode. That was an interesting little commentary I wasn't expecting. But, in any case, yeah, that's going to do it for my review of Solar Opposites. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Also, be sure to go and check out my videos linked in the end screen as well, if you want to see those. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and all those things. Go check out my Patreon if you want to help support me. And yeah, go check out the videos linked in the end screen. Top video is the most recent video. It may or may not be this video. Whereas the bottom video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new, or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!